My name is Jennifer Maddox. Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to the Carnegie Center's Kentucky Great Writers Series, which features authors who live or have lived in Kentucky and have one or more literary works of high quality. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Wrightsville Cook Foundation, the Kentucky Arts Council, Lex Arts, WUKY, and also special thanks to Nate's Coffee. And we ask you to please support our featured writers by buying their books. And one way you could do that is the Carnegie Center's bookshop site, which is www.bookshop.org/shop/Carnegie Center. Now, at no additional cost to you, a portion of your purchase at Bookshop will go to the Carnegie Center, and a portion will go to a local bookstore. So everybody wins. And now we'll begin meeting with our featured authors. If you're just tuning in tonight, I'm Jennifer Maddox, coordinator of the Carnegie Center's Kentucky Great Writers Series. And whether you like comedy or history, literary novels, or true crime, we've got you covered tonight. All three of our featured authors write books that will keep you up way past your bedtime, as I found out, because you simply just can't put them down. They are such good books. And our first author tonight is Margaret Verbal, who's coming to us from Lexington. Welcome, Margaret.
Hi, Jennifer. I'm coming to you from actually my basement in Lexington, but I'm glad to see you. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. We're so glad that we could do this virtually. So now I'm glad that you also suggest that we kick this off doing a conversation between the two of us instead of doing a reading, because that gives us an opportunity to talk about the book and do something just a little different. That's one of the things the pandemic has taught us is you don't always have to do the things that you used to do. You could do them a little different. So thank you for suggesting that. Now, to our folks who are watching from home, I want to tell you a little bit about Margaret. Of course, as she said, she's coming to us from Lexington, but she's also an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. Now, not many authors can claim that their debut novel became a Pulitzer Prize finalist, but Margaret is one of those people. Now, of Maud's Line, the Pulitzer website says it is a novel whose humble prose seems well suited to the remote American milieu it so engagingly invokes, the Indian allotments of 1920s Oklahoma. And her second published novel, Cherokee America, was launched from the Carnegie Center in 2019. The New York Times listed it as one of the 100 most notable books of the year, and in their book review said, viewed as a cultural and character study, Cherokee America sings, it is an essential corrective to the racially tinged myths created to justify the annihilation of indigenous cultures and their theft of native lands. This past fall, Publishers Weekly gave a starred review for Margaret's latest novel, When Two Feathers Fell from the Sky. But I like what Kirkus says. Verble has written an ambitious novel that's impressive in its scope and concept, and it truly is. The novel takes place in 1920s Nashville at Glendale Park, which had a zoo, a golf course, and performers, including Two Feathers, a horse driver who rides her horse off a tall wooden platform into a pool of water 2 or 3 times a day until tragedy strikes. So we might even get to what that tragedy is tonight. So, Margaret, one of my first questions for you was about your book being so deep as far as it took place in 1920s, but it went back in history several generations, and it was just so important also to the story about knowing that history of the land. And I know you personally have a connection to the land where the real Glendale Park was. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was raised in a neighborhood that was built over the remains of that old park zoo. And the old park zoo was built over the remains of a Civil War battlefield. The Battle of Nashville was fought back and forth over that land. And that battlefield was laid over an Indian burial ground, a necropolis of 4,000 graves, so that that piece of land, had generations of history in it. And I wanted to tap all of that history in that particular piece of land for this novel.
So all of that we read in the book, that was real, about the
That was,
graves being there, about them being moved.
all of that was real. That was
Wow.
true. That's real.
Yeah, I was already reading the book before I even knew that Glendale was real and that any of this was, and it was kind of a surprise when I learned that. And even Two Feathers was a real performer, right?
Well, when I was doing the research for the novel, I went back to the archives of the Nashville Tennessean and read, that park was there from the late 1980s into 1931. And I read an awful lot about it. And there was horse diving at that park, which I did not know growing up. And one of the divers was named Two Feathers. Now, I feel sure there was probably, a stage name and, a white woman probably was that diver, but I thought it was a pretty good name, and so I stuck with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved her as a character because she had so many different layers. And, one of my favorite parts of the book was not when we saw Two Feathers as a performer, but when we saw her honoring her Cherokee traditions and beliefs. Whether it was she was smudging her room or she was even talking to the animals. And so, I don't know much about the Cherokee life today, but how much of that is something that is still present in the Cherokee culture?
Well, we still smudge. There's no doubt about that, and certainly talk to animals. I think a lot of people talk to animals, not just Cherokees. Uh, but I mean, she has a worldview that is, um, I would say, is pretty much still alive in the Cherokee Nation.
I really loved, and for those of you at home, you may not know what smudging is, so I probably should have Margaret explain that.
Well, smudging is when you want to get rid of anything bad in your house or your vicinity. You get together a group of, usually cedar and sage and some other kinds of materials are involved, and you light them, and the smoke gets rid of the bad spirits, the bad feelings.
Now, one of the things that I noticed from the first page was that you masterfully addressed racism and inequity through your characters' everyday lives. You didn't come right out with a big event, but instead you made it part of their everyday lives. And so, why did you choose to address it that way instead of having, one of the major incidents be an act of racism?
Well, that's a good question, and there are probably several reasons for that. One is that people who are minorities live with racism every single day. They don't have to have some big hate event for racism to impact their lives. It's something that goes on every day. And I wanted to address it. I was interested in addressing racism in this book. And I was raised in the segregated South. So I was very familiar as a child with segregation and with how all that worked. I mean, it was just a crazy, crazy system of, who could go where and where and I mean, it was just nuts. And I even recognized as a child, this is strange. And then, of course, I come from a family that's biracial, but not African American, Native American, and so I kept comparing in my head all the time growing up um, the different ways that people were treated depending upon their skin color, and so I've always been intensely interested in this and know that it goes on, it went on then and goes on today on an everyday sort of grinding level for people. And so I was interested in writing about that.
And one of the things too that and I don't want to give spoilers away for everything, but toward the end of the book, there's a big event that happens. And the way that this happens, of course, they think that Two Feathers, because she's a Cherokee, must be the guilty party. And at that point, you see her rise up, and she's a powerful woman, and she lets them know, absolutely not. But why didn't I think of that kind of thing? She's not meaning it really, but she's letting them know, I'm not going to put up with this. And I thought that was a perfect way for that, because I could see it coming. I was like, how is this going to resolve itself? But instead, you made that her strength, and I loved how you brought her out in that moment, and she let him have it verbally. So,
Well, Cherokee women have more agency, historically more agency than white women do. They were able to own property when white women were not able to own property. They, if they were tired of their husbands, they put the clothes outside the door and got rid of them. And just were able culturally, it was very matrilineal, matriarchal culture, still is to a large extent. But women have had an awful lot of power in the Cherokee Nation, and as a result, have some real opinions about some things, and will tell you what they think. And that's sort of a cultural. That's really is a cultural difference from whites.
Mm-hmm. And you definitely see that in Two. Just being an outspoken woman at a time when even the genteel white lady up on the hill in her mansion, won't even say things to her husband,
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well done. So, I guess I do want to give away at least one spoiler though, and it's one of the first things that happens in the book that causes everything to kind of take a turn, and it's when Two is diving off of the platform and tragedy strikes. And I would just love to hear you talk about that, and also how that was inspired by something from real life.
Well, what happens, and I think I'd say early in the book that there's a terrible accident, and she dives off of that platform into a pool that collapses into a cave, and she's trapped down there in the cave. And I found in researching the book, when I found that there really had been horse diving there, I also found that the reason they stopped horse diving was that pool of water collapsed into a cave. So that really did happen. And in fact, the first time it happened, they rebuilt it, and it happened again. So they just gave up horse diving at Glendale because the pools kept collapsing. And so I thought it's a pretty good way to get a character into trouble. And of course, as a novelist, you always want your characters to get into trouble. And also a way, going into the ground and coming back up. I mean, that's a metaphor as old as human storytelling. So it works. And it helped that that really happened.
Well, and once I learned that this was based on real life, and of course I read some of the things in your author's note, I'd seen some things online as well. One of the things I found intriguing, that as a child you had found some bones that went back probably to when that was a zoo.
Well, that's actually the reason I set that book in 1926, was because as kids my little neighborhood gang and I, we were always looking for remnants of the zoo, and our parents knew where some of them were, and they, because some of the parents had been raised in Nashville and they had been taken there as children. And so it was sort of a magical place for everybody. So we were always scouting around trying to find things that had to do with that zoo. And we always heard that this tree behind my next door neighbor's backyard was over the either hippopotamus or rhinoceros den. And we didn't know which, but we thought that there was a site of a large animal den. And we got to digging in at the tree, and we found it was an old tree, just about on its last legs, and we found a huge bone in underneath that tree, and we were so excited. It was shoulder bone, and we were so excited. And we went and got our one of our fathers, and he said, put that back. And I wanted him to tell us what kind of bone it was, whether it was a hippopotamus or a rhinoceros. So when I started researching this book, I started looking out for hippopotamuses and rhinoceros. And I never found a mention of a rhinoceros, but I found a mention of a hippopotamus at the Glendale Park Zoo in 1926. So that's when I set the book.
Well, it was a perfect time and place. I just absolutely loved the book. So, thank you for letting me talk to you about this. And
thank you for having me.
And so Margaret's going to hang out so that she can answer some questions about writing later. But we will go on and bring David Dominé in. So thank you, Margaret. So hi, David. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, I'm guessing that this must be a home in old Louisville where you were sitting right now.
Not, I moved out of old Louisville a couple years ago, but I live in the Highlands part of Louisville near Bellarmine University where I teach. And I'm in my magic library right now, which is where I do a lot of my writing. And just so you know what it looks like, I got colored lights on the ceilings and all my antiques and old beat up things that don't go in the rest of the house go in the magic library.
Well, that is such a cool room. I'm so glad you showed that to us. It's kind of neat to think of Kentucky Great Writers taking place there in that space. That's even better maybe than at the Carnegie Center. I don't know. Yeah. Well, let me tell our audience a little bit about you. So when David Dominé is not teaching Spanish or German at Bellarmine University, he's writing in a number of nonfiction genres, cookbooks, travel pieces, memoir, historical sketches, and more. And some of you may have already seen some of his books on ghosts and legends of Louisville. And if you didn't know this, there's actually a lot of TV and radio spots related to those that he's done, including one for Kentucky Life on KET that won an Emmy Award, a regional Emmy Award. And it's really well done. So you can even still see that episode of Kentucky Life on KET. David's got a link to it on his website. He also writes true crime, and his latest book, A Dark Room in Glitterball City, Murders, Secrets, and Scandal in Old Louisville, is one of the things that he might even be talking to us about tonight. I've got a copy of the book too. I was going to hold it up because look at that beautiful cover. I love that cover.
Beautiful, yeah.
And I thought about writing a line or two about what this book is about. And then when I opened up the flap, I was like, that's actually kind of perfect. So I'm going to read the first paragraph on the jacket flap because it really says a lot about what this is about. On June 18th, 2010, police discover a body buried in the wine cellar of a Victorian mansion in Old Louisville. James Carroll, shot and stabbed the year before, has lain for 7 months in a plastic storage bin, his temporary coffin. Homeowner Jeffrey Munt and his boyfriend Joseph Banis, or is it Banis? Banis? Okay, Joseph Banis.
Yeah.
Point the finger at each other in what locals dub the Pink Triangle Murder. So that is David's book, and it received a starred review from Publishers Weekly. And in that review, they said that David provides an enthralling deep dive into a bizarre murder case. Fans of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil will be captivated. And like that famous novel, David's book immerses you in settings and introduces you to a number of eccentric people. The New York Times review of David's book also mentions the prejudices and homophobia that erupts during the trials. So while researching and writing this book, David spoke with hundreds of people, including some you may recognize in the acknowledgments, because there are a lot of Kentucky authors also listed there. So now I'll let David take it from here. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks. And Jennifer and Sarah and Claudia, all the people at Carnegie Center, thanks for having me on. And it's an honor to be on with esteemed colleagues like Margaret and Gwenda. So it's a real pleasure. But yeah, what I wanted to do is take 10 minutes and read from this book number 13, which, as you said, is called A Dark Room in Glitterball City. If you're from Louisville, there's a lot of familiar faces and places. If you're from Kentucky, probably a lot of places you might recognize as well. But the thing is, this deals with a house I almost bought. I used to live on 3rd Street in Old Louisville. I went and looked at a big mansion that had a wine cellar. I decided not to buy it because the house, the 11-bedroom house, was just in too bad of shape that I didn't want to, take that project on. Moved to my current place where I am right now in the Highlands part of Louisville. And then 2 years later, I woke up one morning, I turned on the local news, and this house was on the local news because the night before they had dug a body out of the wine cellar in the basement. And since I almost bought the house, and since Old Louisville is kind of my bailiwick, I sat it on the trials, and it turns out the two guys living there each accused the other of killing this guy and burying him in the wine cellar. And it was a fascinating story. The house itself had, this terrible murder take place there, but in the past it had been a sanatorium. Locals called it a haunted house. There had been an S&M club there back in the past. All kinds of things, including counterfeiters living in the house, had taken place there. So as the story broke and I was kind of weighing whether or not to buy the house or not, I decided not to. But then as I weighed whether or not I should write this story about this terrible murder, one night I couldn't sleep. So I got up in the middle of the night and I decided to go to the house where the body had been found and kind of do a little exploring. And this is like 3 or 4 days after the murder had made the news and the house was kind of abandoned. So it's a 4-page section from my book, A Dark Room in Glitterball City. It starts on page 28, and it's about the night I kind of snuck into the abandoned house where the body was found and kind of my experience there. All right. So I parked across the street, and then I found an enormous elm that afforded a hidden vantage spot. An old-fashioned gas lamp near the sidewalk cast the crumbling porch of the old Robinson place, as it was known, in a yellow pallor. The complete darkness enveloped the rest of the house. The residents to the left and the large brick apartment block to the right were devoid of light as well. After a glance over my shoulder, I hustled up the sidewalk and I paused at the front steps. Crime scene tape still sealed the front door, and a bit of color on the tattered welcome mat caught my eye. Somebody had left a bunch of bright pink roses tied together with a yellow ribbon. A prayer candle, the kind that kind of looks like a tall drinking glass with colorful saints and Virgin Mary splashed across the front, leaned against the front door. I studied the improvised altar for a moment, and before anybody could see me, I darted around the side of the house where a rickety-looking metal scaffold rose to the 3rd floor. Framed by a bottom portion of scaffolding, another door beckoned, its flaking white paint strangely iridescent in the darkness. Caution tape had run across this entrance as well. However, somebody had torn through the yellow and black plastic, and tatters fluttered in a light breeze. The wooden door, stood ajar, no doubt forced open by thrill seekers or curious neighbors, and relief washed over me when I realized my job of gaining entry to the cellar had been made all the easier. Still, I hesitated before going inside. What if somebody else was already down there? Could the cops still be around? I took a breath to calm my nerves. Grit and sand beneath my feet, I eased myself through without having to push the door any wider. On the landing, I pulled out a small flashlight and I used it to get my bearings. One side had a flight of stairs that went up to the main part of the house. The other had steps that headed down. After a pause, I started for the basement, but then I reconsidered and I decided to check out the upper floors first. How had it changed in the last 2 years? I adored exploring old houses, even in the middle of the night, without electricity, and even if a recent murder had been committed there. My hand followed the handrail up a narrow opening with a partially closed door, and I slithered through, and I came to stand in the foyer where a dim stream of light shone through the leaded glass in the front window, and it cast a distorted rectangle onto the parquet floor. Although mud and dirt had been tracked here and there, patches of hardwood still gleamed. The darkness only served to make the front hall even more imposing than the last time I had seen it. Emerging from beneath the coffered and paneled grand staircase, I studied the intricate carvings of the banister and the sculpted legs on the newel posts anchored to the bottom landing. 4 steps led up to the landing, and then another short flight proceeded to a larger platform framed with an impressive arrangement of leaded glass windows on the left. From that landing, the stairs doubled back and ascended in a straight shot to the next level. Within 10 minutes, I had reconnoitered the second and third floors, the flashlight beam guiding me from room to room. Some stood empty, others had a random piece of furniture or a couple of boxes stacked against the wall. The space that aroused my curiosity most was the front left corner room on the second floor, room number 6. According to the police report from the week before, Joey had threatened to kill Jeffrey when Jeffrey had barricaded himself in this room. Why did Joey want to kill him? Nobody had explained this yet. The 911 dispatcher only reported that Jeffrey claimed his boyfriend was trying to break through the wooden door with a hammer so he could come inside and murder him. Sure enough, when I examined the wood of the door, I made out scrapes and clear indentations that fit the flat head of a hammer. There was also a very small hole with clean, neat edges. From a bullet? From what I had read, things began to get interesting after the officers arrested Joey and took him into custody several days before. One of the 2 residents of 1435 South 4th Street brought up something about a body in the basement, but who and why remained a mystery. After police dug the body out of the old wine cellar, they arrested Jeffrey as well, and they had charged both him and his boyfriend with murder. Each accused the other of committing the act. So I pushed the door open wide, the beam of light picking up traces of black powder used when dusting for fingerprints, and outside a dog howled. Despite the summer heat, a chill pervaded the space. Had Jamie Carroll met his end in this room? On a far wall, a dark stain shimmered next to a carved fireplace mantle. An ugly drape dangled limply, only partially covering the window. I turned and I made my way for the bottom floor via the servants' stairs. Though sparsely furnished, the living room, dining room, and a large study had beautiful floors, moldings, and wainscoting. Sconces decorated several walls, and marble surrounds with hand-carved griffiths accentuated mantel shelves on the fireplaces. The kitchen, on the other hand, had only several battered cupboards left as reminders of what the space had been intended for. Through a streaked window, I saw the dilapidated carriage house across the overgrown backyard, cast in the eerie glow of the street lamp in the alley. Suddenly, the halcyon glow of the bulb intensified, and then came an electric pop, and it flashed and burnt out. I looked at my watch. Already half an hour had passed. So I followed the hallway back to the foyer, and I entered the narrow flight of stairs that snaked under the grand staircase. Before descending, I paused. The flashlight illuminated something I hadn't noticed on my way up. In a cloakroom, 2 old-fashioned and battered canes hung from a shelf. Perhaps carved of oak or hickory, one had a simple design, while the other sported a gentle corkscrew shape on the shaft. Was one for Joey and the other for Jeffrey? Jeffrey would have had the fancier one. I imagined him wielding his walking stick the last time I saw him as he tottered through the breakfast joint where I had seen him chirping top of the morning to all within earshot. I resisted the urge to pinch the walking sticks and I took the steps. At the side entrance landing where I had entered initially, I halted. The cool, early morning breeze channeled through the still half-open door, and my ears perked up. Had I just heard something in the cellar? I listened for a minute or two, heart pounding in my chest, but no sounds followed, except for the rustle of leaves outside. After another minute, I directed the flashlight at the narrow flight of stairs, and down I went. Sandy footprints tracked across the filthy concrete floor, and clumps of mud plopped up here and there. Shadows danced in the rafters as I shone the beam around the small space at the bottom of the steps. The light scraped across the doorway of one of the adjacent rooms, briefly illuminating the white rectangular shape of some appliance in the far corner. So I shuffled into that room, looked around, and then I slunk through another doorway. Jamie's body had been found in the front corner room on the right. So after passing through several more spaces, I turned and I headed to the part of the house facing 4th Street. The closer I came to Jamie Carroll's makeshift grave, the more intense my sense of unease became. My heart pounded with a steady thump, 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 but it almost gave out when a soft noise caught my ear. It could have been the sound of a side door being opened or closed, or maybe a footstep gliding along the grit of the cellar floor. So I doused the light. My ear strained, but I heard nothing else, save for the racing of my heart as I wedged myself into a corner and waited. A minute passed, and then 2 more, and only silence followed, so I turned the light back on and I tried to breathe. Without a sound, I inched towards the front of the house. I passed through a large room with a cement block wall and a mound of what appeared to be refuse on one side. When I stepped into the next room, the poured concrete floor gave way to hard-packed soil. Only a few rooms had dirt floors in that basement, and they had discovered Jamie in one of them. A momentary once-over with a flashlight revealed no signs of the burial pit in this room, so I illuminated the doorway on the opposite side, and I went that way. 2 solid walls with small windows at the very top revealed the space I entered next as a corner room. It had a hard-packed dirt floor. A marked shift in the tone of white paint indicated the outline of a large piece of furniture, maybe a wardrobe or a massive pure mirror that had once rested against the wall. Cobwebs dangled from several hooks embedded in the rafters. Old wooden shelves looked like they once held bottles of wine. Something sparkled in a far corner when my light hit it, but I kept the beam moving until it illuminated a neat gaping hole in the shape of a rectangle off-center in the middle of the room. Next to this pit, a huge mound of dirt rested on a stained tarpaulin. I released a gasp that echoed off the walls. My heart pounding again, I took a single step forward. The grave where Joey and Jeffrey had buried Jamie Carroll. Immediately, the room took on a dark and oppressive air, and once more, I willed my feet forward. Standing at its edge, I looked down into a rectangle of blackness. Trembling, my hand directed the light beam to the bottom of the hole, and it scoured the corners. It had to be 5 or 6 feet deep. Hard to fathom, but just a week ago, it had been covered over, and only those who had a hand in it knew the secret of Jamie's demise and internment. Now the entire city was privy to the dark mysteries at play at this house in Old Louisville. But had the mansion given up all its secrets? A cold shudder tickled its way across my shoulders and my nose picked up on a faint odor, the musty, dirty smell so typical of basements. But I got a whiff of something else. The distant smell of stench of rotten decay. No, I had to be psyching myself out. But I closed my eyes and I inhaled. It reeked of death, sickly sweet and light in the air. But then there was a change and my nostrils flared. Now it smelled more like smoke, cigarette smoke. And a man's menacing voice jolted me out of my reverie just then, fancying meeting you here just now. And that's the end of that chapter.
Wow, David. Whew. You were definitely the right person to write this book. I mean, my goodness, no wonder they called it very similar to Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, because that just the heavy, atmosphere. And of course, your background in doing, stories and legends. Wow. Now we all have to know whose voice was that. But I guess we're going to have to read the book, right?
Yeah, that's it. I know how to work it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David, for sharing that excerpt with us tonight. So coming up with us in just a moment is Gwenda Bond, but I want to remind our audience who is watching and listening tonight that you can submit your questions for the authors in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And so after Gwenda is done, all three of the authors will come back on and we will ask them some questions. So welcome, Gwenda. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, great to be here with everybody.
If we were at the Carnegie Center, you could have just walked over there and joined us.
I miss being there.
I do too. Now, for those of you who don't know, Gwenda lives in downtown Lexington. She's really close to the Carnegie Center. She's actually a mentor at the Carnegie Center Author Academy. And the first weekend of June this year, she is going to be the keynote speaker for the Carnegie Center's Books in Progress Conference. So we are really excited about that. She's also a founding board member of the Lexington Writers Room, which is just a block away from the Carnegie Center as well. So it's a great little literary triangle we've got going on there. And she's had some really interesting things happen in her writing career. So when the folks behind Stranger Things were looking for an author to write the prequel to their hit TV series, they chose Gwenda to do that, which just is I was so excited when I heard about that. Somebody from Lexington that I know is writing this book, and she did, and it was a New York Times bestseller. So it was really a big hit. But that's not her first book. I mean, she's written a lot of books, and Gwenda's written several different book series, including one featuring a teenage Lois Lane, a traveling circus series, and she's also co-written with her husband Christopher Rowe a series called The Supernormal Sleuthing Service, which is for younger readers. And that's really just within the last 10 years. Her latest writing adventures are a new series in the realm of paranormal romantic comedy. And as Kirkus Review says, for the main character in Not Your Average Hot Guy, it's the end of the world as she knows it, but the Prince of Hell is fine, which I thought was just absolutely perfect. Now, a few reviewers have mentioned the witty banter and the humor in this novel, and which has a sequel actually coming out this April called The Date from Hell, which is also a perfect title. Now, based on early reviews of the second book, all the things people loved about the first, they're going to love about the second. And some have even said, I like the second one even better. So it's not true that sequels are bad. In Gwenda's case, people love the sequel too. So I don't know what she's going to read from us tonight, but Gwenda, I'll let you surprise us and give us a little sample of what you've got there.
Okay. These are my first romantic comedies. They kind of span the cusp of YA and adult, so they're crossover books. Of course, if you're going to write a romantic comedy, why not make it span Lexington and hell? And there's a lot of globe hopping in these books, especially because I wrote the second one during the pandemic and I really desperately wanted to travel. But I think I'm going to read the first chapter of the second one, The Date from Hell, and I can take no credit for these titles because The first one was supposed to be called The Great Escape, and then the marketing team was like, no, we'll come up with something better. So The Date from Hell is the second one, which is out in April. I don't, there's spoilers in here, but like it's a romantic comedy, so I'm pretty sure you know that the two main characters end up together at the end of the first book, and this will conclude their duology together. So don't think you need to know anything because I kind of wrote this chapter, the beginning of it, so that people could drop in without reading the first one if they so chose. Chapter 1, Callie. The Grey Keep, the Kingdom of Hell. I stand on my tiptoes to slide a book with a thick black spine adorned with golden skulls, being the rules of the Kingdom of Hell, volume 99, back into its place on the shelf. The candle in the nearest sconce gusts flame. This is where it goes, I say, between 98 and 100. The invisible demonic wraiths who keep these tomes in tidy condition are rightly finicky. Another burst of flame crackles in answer. Fine, I interpret it as, if you say so, but we're checking later. I'm a certain way about books too, so I get it. My useless undergraduate history degree was motivated in part from a deviant level of enjoyment and research. The near apocalypse by misunderstanding I helped save the world from came from my love of books too in a roundabout way. I accidentally bought a real grimoire for my family's escape room business. A cult showed up and stole it, then conjured Luke, Prince of Hell, now my boyfriend, and chaos ensued. Anyway, I always knew that one day I'd walk into a library, the perfect library, and it would instantly be my favorite place on earth. All the other libraries I'd flirted with would just be warm ups. The Earth part turned out not to be true, but the warm up part's truer than I ever imagined. Hell's Library tried to drive me to madness the first time we met, but after a few weeks with open access, it feels almost like home. I turn and take it in for a breath, an actual breath, a deep inhale of old book goodness. The stacks loom 13 stories tall up to the domed ceiling mural of Lucifer presenting a book, aka access to knowledge, to a horde of falling angels. Typical Lucifer overstatement. The population of this library is usually low. I have it to myself for the moment, though Luke should be here any time. And of course, there's the only person who the library truly loves back. "Milady," Porsoth says by way of greeting as he clicks in from the corridor. He's trotted out this overly formal hello the past couple of times I've been here. "Just Callie. I'm not a lady. Well, I am sort of, but you know what I mean." "I do," Porsoth says. "I merely hold you in high esteem. A month ago, having a conversation with an owl-faced, pig-bodied scholar of a demon would have been odd. Today, we're arguing etiquette." "We're friends," I say. "Friends don't need to call each other fancy things." That sets Porthos back on his heels. I forget how sentimental he is. He stops and puts a wing with a small hand on the end of it to his breast. "Friends," he repeats. "Oh, milady, Callie, we are friends." He has a suspicious shimmer like tears in his eyes. He's a good friend to have, especially as I'm reminded that he can be several stories tall with a frightening manner when he summons his booming voice. "Agnes, don't dawdle. Callie needs help with a book." I know he's trying to be helpful, but Agnes hates being ordered around. Given that she's one of Hell's lost souls, a former human, she spends a lot of time grumpy. Scowl in place, she stomps into the doorway in a tunic and boots. Her face is small and heart-shaped, her dirty blonde pigtails droop. She's still an 11-year-old girl, at least on the outside. I can get it myself, I say. And pluck volume 100 from its spot. Agnes stalks over and put her hands on it too. "Allow me. It's fine." We have a brief tug of war in which I feel about 11. She has that effect. Agnes glances down and sees what book it is. She lets go. "That my last chance? Good luck with that, milady." Maybe I'm making it up, but I think I detect an emotion other than crankiness buried underneath the words, besides sarcasm. "Agnes, I meant what I said. I'm going to find a way. What happened to you is unfair, and Porthos says you're far from alone. Most people would be grateful at such a generous attempt on their behalf," Porthos says to Agnes. "Perchance I won't get my hopes up," Agnes says dramatically. "She's on the last book of rules and nothing. I'm doomed to remain here. Hell is forever. You brought me here. You should know." Porthos' head dips. "I had no choice." When I first met Agnes, it took me a few days to pull her story out of each of them. Agnes stole the illuminated Bible from her town's church, high up on the sin scale. I wanted to spy the pictures up close, but girls weren't allowed, she said, defiant, telling me about it. She promptly ran into the street and got mowed down by an ox cart. Yes, she essentially got hit by the equivalent of a bus in the Middle Ages. At the time, 11 was plenty old enough to be considered an adult, and so she came here to hell by way of Porsoff. When he left his job torturing and assumed his current form, he brought her to the palace with him as a library assistant. She says it's just torture by another name. Bottom line is, even a demon understands she doesn't deserve eternal punishment. And my idea of second chances for Agnes and people like her was born. Porsoff says I'll never get anywhere with a new policy without a precedent to save. A time when such a major change has occurred. I've been combing over the rules and regulations ever since, searching for something to help make our case. Assuming Lucifer will even hear us out, but we'll cross that burning bridge when we come to it. I feel like I might finally be about to find a purpose in life beyond dating Hell's Most Eligible Bachelor. Porsoff says I've got fresh eyes from not being part of the system, and I've gotten the sense lately that Lucifer might even be the tiniest bit pleased with Luke's new, somewhat more focused approach to the afterlife. And maybe he's impressed with my not seeming too afraid of the devil. This formerly aimless bookworm is starting to have plans. I settled into a leather chair that looks serene and straight-backed, severe and straight-backed, but is surprisingly comfortable with that volume. Porsoff sends Agnes for tea, and she returns with a tray for him alone. I don't take it personally. I've gotten used to the way these books are constructed, and I can afford to skim. They aren't written by any one wraith, but linked to Lucifer's will and changed automatically whenever he adds or, I'm praying, takes away or changes an operating principle. So far, the text has been additions. I'm about halfway through the book when I sigh and lean my head back against the chair, frustrated. Hands cover my eyes gently. I inhale a scent even sexier than old books. Luke. With a grin, I slide my fingers up Luke's arm and tug away his makeshift blindfold. I stare up into his impossibly handsome face, crowned with a shock of tousled blonde hair. His blue eyes nearly make me forget we have an audience. He seems to get more gorgeous with every passing day. It's seriously insulting. Or it's because you've fallen in love with him. But we haven't said that yet, neither of us. How long have you been here? I ask. An affectionate smile plays at the edges of his mouth. Watching you read? A while, he says. The smile grows lazy, flirty. It is one of my favorite hobbies. I fight a blush. How'd you keep Agnes from tipping me off? We look over and she holds up half a cupcake from the kitchens. Bribery, she says around a mouthful. I take it you've had no luck, Luke asks. He assures me he's behind my idea all the way, but he pitches in on the reading lightly at best. I suspect this talk of souls and redemption hits close for him. He admitted to me the other day that he's still not sure what his having a soul means long term. I'm not sure he believes he has the ability to change, that his demonic nature doesn't define him. I told her it was a fool's errand, Agnes says. But Callie doesn't give up just because someone tells her to, Luke says. It's one of the first things I learned about her. Was he about to say something else? I search his eyes, but his expression is back to contained beauty. Lucky for you, I say to Luke, and then pouty Agnes with chocolate frosting on her cheek, and it will be for you too. I go back to skimming my book, and the next 2 pages are more rules. And then I nearly stop breathing as I turn a page and see one single heading followed by a long list afterward. I decide it might be the most beautiful word in the English language. Amendments. My finger trembles as I run it down the list and confirm that I'm right. A date followed by an adjustment to an existing rule. 1327, no consumption of human flesh on earth. It spreads disease. Black Plague era, well duh. 1684, changing a lake of blood to a lake of vomit for the torture of particularly squeamish people. Gross. 1908, the exact punishment of damned souls taken under the age of 15 will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Wait a second. Porsoff? I try to keep my voice level. When did you move to the Grey Keep with Agnes? Could it have been 1908? And that's
Thank you so much, Gwenda. Obviously, you're one of those writers who can just take any genre and make it your own. I mean, that was
Make it
so
weird.
different.
Take any genre and make it weird.
Make it fun. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have all three of our authors come back and join us. And, I'd like to say thank you to Gwenda Bond. Thank you, David Dominé. Thank you, Margaret Verbal. All three of you all have been wonderful readers tonight or speakers. And it's been a joy talking about your books. And so now we get to do a little bit of Q&A from our audience. And if you're in our audience and you have not submitted your question, it's not too late. You could still do that. So I think that one of the first questions that we'll ask is, when researching your books, and this is for David and for Margaret, when researching your books, were there any rare or obscure sources or hard to find information that you were able to uncover for your novel? And if so, what might those have been?
I'll let Margaret go first. Okay.
Well, that's what I was going to say, David.
Ladies, go first.
You're quick, aren't you? I think the most obscure piece of research I did for this novel was I was out in Oklahoma, and I went to the E.W. Marlin Museum. None of you know who that is, okay? And I could spend 20 minutes talking about him. He was once the governor of Oklahoma, and he married his wife's adopted daughter. You talk about a scandal, okay? And he had huge mansions, 4 polo fields in one of them. Okay, this is out in nowhere, Oklahoma. Okay, but I was in one of his mansions and went down to the basement, and there was a little corner of the basement about the size of this little room I'm in here. Okay, and it was the museum of the 101 Ranch. That was all that was left of it. And the 101 Ranch had been a cultural phenomenon in the United States for decades. And that's really what was left of it. And I became interested in it then and read books on it and found that everybody in the world went to the 101 Ranch. And that's where I have Two Feathers originating from. But it was an absolutely fascinating place. And I don't know if I hadn't stumbled upon that little museum and that mansion, I don't know if I would have written that book the same way. I doubt it.
That's such a big part of who she is her life that she had on the 101.
That's right.
That's interesting. All right, David, what about you?
Well, for me, I just find talking to people and hearing their stories, it can lead you to so many interesting facts and tidbits. A lot of it's kind of murky, like gray areas, but a lot of times stories, there's something in the past. And one of my most fascinating parts of this book that I just wrote was discovering a lot of the Black history in Louisville and talking to people, Black friends. I found out back in the 1870s, they were doing boycotts of the public transit system in Louisville. Blacks were refusing to be segregated on the trolleys, and they were organizing rides and boycotts way before, Rosa Parks and things like that. And for that reason, despite the Jim Crow laws and things, except for a very short period at the very beginning, public transit in Louisville was never segregated. Whites and Blacks were riding together. So a lot of this I found just by talking to people, and also talking about going down rabbit holes. I will go into old archives and stuff, the New York Times, the Courier Journals, and I will just pick a day in the past and I'll read all the newspaper articles from that day. And it's amazing the stuff that's out there. So for me, that would probably be one of the big things. It's just, there's so much out there, racially speaking, culturally speaking, that's documented. And if you just kind of scratch the surface, if you try to look for things, there's fascinating information out there.
Thank you, David. Gwenda, I'm going to ask you a question. So you've written for young adults for years, And of course, you've also done, I guess it's middle grade, the sleuthing service. And so now, and you've of course done some things for adults as well. So, switching between your audiences for kids and adults, was it an easy change or did it come with any complications?
Not really. I mean, it's always about the story, and none of them are easier or harder. It's just about finding the register. I mean, there is that great quote that is from someone who I'm blanking on the name of, but like, if you can't make it simple, write it for kids. I do think that writing for young children, especially, I mean, the youngest children, picture book writing to me is probably the hardest skill, and the one that most people can't do. I certainly can't. And I think that kids are just an audience that is they're very honest in their reactions, and they're not really, you really have to meet them where they are. They have real good radars for, okay, this is nonsense. But like, the fun thing about writing for adults is adults have read all the same books you have. They have watched TV shows, they have lived lives. And so you can layer in references that maybe you can't do for a very young audience.
Makes sense. All three of our authors, I'll ask you, are you a morning writer, daytime writer, or nighttime writer? And where is your favorite writing space?
I mean, I have to say the writer's room, right? Because I co-founded it, but it really is my favorite place. If you guys haven't visited, when you're in Lexington, let us know and drop by. There's a little construction going on in the building right now, but we are a block from the Carnegie Room, and we have 2,000 square feet in a 200-year-old building that we've made into a funky workspace and community space for writers of all kinds. And I mean, I think that our community here and this reading series, one of the reasons I love it is because you see how different, like the variety of Kentucky writers, the work that we're doing, and the writer's room is the same way. We have people doing all sorts of interesting things. And to me, that's one of the cool, unique things about this community. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I usually do my best writing in the morning, but I'm a really poorly disciplined writers. I admire my friends who can get up at 6 o'clock every morning and have their coffee, and then they write till 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock every day. I can't do that. If I have a deadline, I can do that like for 2-3 months at a time. I can write 12 hours a day, but otherwise it's like here and there. But usually mornings are my most productive times. I've got a couple local coffee shops I like to write in Louisville. Days Coffee on Barstown Road, Heine Brothers, but what I pointed out before, the Magic Library, this is like my inspiration place. And what I love about the Magic Library, just let me show you this is one of the reasons we moved to this house. The Magic Library is a secret room. So you go into you're in our living room, the living room is like this, but then over here on this wall next to the fireplace, you don't really notice until you open up the secret door, and then you got the Magic Library where I got all my secret stuff. And so for me, this is my place where I do a lot of my writing.
Even the lights above too, it's just the ambiance that it gives that room. I would definitely be writing in there too.
All right, I'm one of those disciplined friends that, like the disciplined friends that David has. I write 7 days a week. I get up, I read about a half hour worth of research before I start writing, and then I write. I was writing by 7:25 this morning, and I do that every morning that I'm not traveling. I don't do it in this room down here. I do it 2 floors up in an actual author study that doesn't have as good a connection for internet as that support. It's got great connection for internet, but not for Zoom. So I always do my Zoom down here. But that's where I go to, and I do it every day. And it's just like one step at a time. Eventually you turn out a novel that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let's see, we've got a question for Gwenda. Gwenda, and I'm reading the question from someone in the audience. Gwenda, every character in your books, no matter what the level, is well drawn. It seems you always aim at the heart of experience. Can you speak to what drives your writing?
Gosh. I think I just am easily bored and have a lot of interest. And I also think that the thing that prose in particular does that no other art form does is allow you to show the inside of people. And I, as anyone who's met me knows, will easily turn into Lois Lane and start interrogating people. And I think I do the same thing with my characters. I want them to be well rounded, and I like writing friend groups. I like writing ensemble casts. And I think just most people are more interesting than they give themselves credit for. I think, and so characters are the same. Like, I want them to be as interesting as people are in actual life. And I know we're supposed to be like, people are boring and dumb, but people are actually really interesting.
I think it's a great question also for David and for Margaret as well, is what drives your writing?
I guess I'll go first, Margaret. So since I
Sure.
go first last time, but I don't know. It's just, for so many writers, it's catharsis. There's things you have to get out, things you have to get on the page, and depends on what's going on in your life. But for me, a lot of it is just I like to put down on paper the things I like to read, and so a lot of it's just selfishness. I want to write something that I would like to read one day because it's something I'm not finding, So for me, a lot of it, I just want to document parts of my life, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. But yeah, it's just, for me, it's a way of getting things out, working things out. It's therapy for me, getting things on paper, I need to get out.
I guess I would say, I was raised with a bunch of Indians, and at the time, the Cherokee Nation was not supposed to exist by this year. When all of the Indians that had been enrolled by the Dawes Commission in about 1907, when they died, then there would be no more Cherokee Indians. And so I was raised knowing that the people that I knew and loved were going to be obliterated, and that they would not exist anymore as a people. And that really, really bothered me. And I swore to myself when I was a kid that I would do something about that. And so I have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you all have been wonderful readers. You've all been fantastic with your responses too. Thank you so much for letting us ask questions and talk to you about your books. And
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me, as we're wrapping up here, I want to remind the folks who are watching at home that you can support these authors by buying their books at the bookshop.org page that the Carnegie Center has, which is bookshop.org/shop/Carnegie Center. And that is, if you're watching our live feed, you'll see it there pasted into the window for you. I do also want to mention real quick that I've said the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame was actually going to be on March 23rd. It's actually March 24th. But it is going to be in the Kentucky Theater. That's the plan for right now. So we're so glad the Kentucky Theater is open once again. I will tell all of you all who are watching tonight that if you missed any portion of the event and you would like to see it again, we are going to be having it up on Carnegie's Facebook page and on our YouTube channel in the very near future. And WUKY Lexington 91.3 FM will be rebroadcasting this show twice sometime in the near future. And if you're one of these folks, who are watching at home and say, yeah, but I live in New York, well, of course, you can watch it. You could listen to the radio station from their website because they do live streaming on there. So thank you all once again for coming. It was a wonderful night, 3 very different books, and yet you all entertained us and educated us and told us so much about Kentucky and beyond. So thank you all once again. You all have a good night.